That morning had the kind of light that feels older than the day itself. A thin mist clung to the shoulders of the Smoky Mountains, soft and silver, as if the sun was reluctant to touch the ground. 4 hikers stepped out of their parked car at the trailhead, laughing softly against the chill. Their voices echoed just slightly, the way sound does in the valleys here, like it's traveling farther than it should. There was Mia, 32, with a wiry frame, and a habit of walking faster than she meant to. She'd been on more trails than anyone else in the group, always the first to plan the route, and the last to worry about how remote it might be. Beside her was her younger brother Caleb, 26, with the kind of cautious energy that made him keep checking his pack straps the way some people tap their pockets for keys. Then came Dan and Holly, a couple in their late 30s, quieter but bound together in that easy rhythm of people who've traveled far together. They'd picked this section of the Smokies because Mia had found an old Rangers forum online, half forgotten in the corners of the internet. Someone had mentioned ruins out here, a cluster of cabins nobody visits anymore, because the trail doesn't lead anywhere now. It wasn't on any official map. No coordinates, just a vague mention. Follow the old service road past the Third Creek crossing, then look for the split in the pines. From the start, there was something about the idea that felt off. Not wrong exactly, but oddly fragile, like if they spoke too much about it, the place might vanish before they arrived. The air smelled of wet leaves and distant wood smoke, though no one had lit a fire here in decades. The deeper they went, the quieter the woods became. In the Smokies, the silence isn't truly silence, it's layered. You hear the stream in the distance, the occasional squirrel darting up bark, a warbler's quick, thin call. But that day, even the wind through the hemlock seemed to pause. After 2 hours of steady climbing, they reached the Third Creek. The water was cold enough to numb the feet through boots. They found the split in the pines exactly where the forum post had said. A narrow, nearly invisible track led away from the main trail, vanishing into rhododendron thickets. Something changed the moment they stepped onto it. Caleb noticed it first. The air felt heavier. Not damp, but weighted, as though they'd passed into a pocket where time moved differently. He didn't say it aloud, but the others slowed a little, glancing around like they too had sensed something pressing in. The track wound upward, then dipped into a hollow, and there it was. A village. At first glance, it looked abandoned. Wooden cabins stood in a loose circle around a clearing, their walls silvered with age. A well stood in the center moss, climbing halfway up the stones. But then, details emerged. On the nearest cabin's porch, a rocking chair swayed gently, though there was no wind. Through the open window, Mia saw a table set for a meal, plates of bread, sliced apples, a steaming pot, steam still rising. It was impossible. They moved deeper into the clearing, calling out once or twice, voices uncertain. No reply. In another cabin, a kettle sat over a small fire, flames burning low. The smell of cooking beans drifted out so strong it made Caleb's stomach twist with hunger. Yet there was no one. No footsteps in the dirt except their own. No murmur of conversation behind closed doors. Every cabin they checked was the same food, half-prepared clothes, hung neatly, oil lamps still burning. In one, a crib rocked slightly, the blanket inside rumpled as though a child had just been lifted from it. Dan touched the edge of a loaf of bread. It was warm. By now, the light had shifted. Shadows in the clearing seemed sharper, as though the sun was suddenly closer to the horizon than it should be. The hikers kept glancing at each other, trying to read in one another's faces some kind of rational explanation. A reenactment village, maybe, an elaborate camping group, but there were no backpacks, no modern gear. The cabins looked old, hand-cut nails in the beams, tools worn from decades of use. Holly, usually the calmest, was the first to say it. "I don't think we should be here." They agreed wordlessly. but when they turned back toward the trail they'd entered on, the pines were there, and not there. The narrow track had vanished. In its place was an unbroken wall of undergrowth. Caleb pushed through, certain they'd find the path again, but every direction looped back toward the clearing. It was then they heard it, not footsteps, but a kind of shifting in the air, like a sigh that moved through the cabins. One of the rocking chairs stopped moving. The temperature dropped so quickly Mia could see her breath. In the farthest cabin, a curtain swayed. She stepped toward it, feeling the others close behind. Inside, the room was empty, but the bed was still indented, as though someone had been lying there moments ago. On the floor near the bed frame, a single shoe rested on its side, and the leather soft and cracked with age. It was small, a child's shoe. Holly's voice was tight. "Mia, we should go. Now." But where the light was dimming faster than it should, shadows spilling across the clearing like water. And then, the smell changed. The sweet, warm smell of bread and beans turned sour like something long rotted. Steam no longer rose from the pots. The air was colder still. Dan's voice cut through the quiet. "It's like they were just here, and then they weren't." No one answered. In that moment, Mia realized the wrongness wasn't just in what they were seeing, it was in what they weren't. No flies buzzed over the food. No wood cracked in the fireplaces as it cooled. It was as if every process heat decay sound had been paused, held in some kind of still frame. And then the silence broke. A voice faint, almost lost in the trees. Not words, or maybe words in a language they didn't know. Slow rising and falling like a lullaby, half remembered. Caleb turned toward it, and for a moment Mia thought he was going to step into the trees, follow it. But his eyes were glassy, unfocused. She grabbed his arm. "Don't." The voice faded. The air felt heavier still. They stood in that clearing, 4 people, in the middle of a place that by every logical measure should not exist, or should not exist like this. And as the last of the sun slid behind the ridgeline, they knew, with the kind of certainty that doesn't need proof, if they didn't leave now, they never would. The decision to move came wordlessly. Dan was the first to take a step, and the others followed without speaking. It wasn't just that they wanted to leave. It was the sense that the clearing itself wanted them gone, or perhaps wanted something from them they weren't willing to give. They aimed for the slope behind the farthest cabin, reasoning that if the pine track had vanished, maybe they could crest the ridge and drop back down to the marked trail. The incline was steeper than it looked, slick with moss and damp leaves. The trees crowded close, their trunks black in the dim light. The sound came again. That same lilting voice, not loud, but close now, too close. Caleb froze mid-step, head tilted. His lips moved like he was repeating the words under his breath, as though he could understand them. Mia yanked him forward, but his eyes didn't leave some point behind her. "Don't listen," she hissed, though she didn't know why she was whispering. They climbed in silence for several minutes, the air growing colder, until they reached a low outcropping of rock. From here, they should have been able to see the valley below, maybe even the glint of the creek. Instead, the world ended in a wall of white. Not fog exactly, thicker, with no movement, no edges. It was as if the mountains had been swallowed whole. Behind them, the village was gone. They turned, expecting to see the cabins below the neat circle around the well. But there was only forest, endless and dark. Dan swore under his breath, scanning the trees. "We didn't walk far enough to lose sight of it." No one answered. A shape moved in the mist. Tall, thin, not quite human in the way it swayed. Mia blinked, and it was gone. The air pressed against them heavy enough that every breath felt like pulling water into their lungs. Holly stumbled, catching herself on a root. Her face was pale, her lips bluish. Something's not right. My head. Caleb dropped his pack without seeming to realize it. It hit the ground with a dull thud, but no sound of its contents shifting. Just dead weight. The voice returned. Louder this time, layered as though 2 or 3 people were speaking the same words, just out of sync. Dan spun toward it, flashlight beam cutting through the trees, though the light seemed weaker than it should, barely reaching more than a few feet. In its beam, something glinted. They approached slowly. It was a tin cup half buried in the leaves, still holding water. The surface didn't ripple despite the cold breeze that now moved through the branches. Mia's chest tightened. This wasn't just abandoned, this was paused. Another cabin emerged through the trees. Not part of the clearing they'd seen earlier, but standing alone, leaning slightly to one side. A lantern glowed in its single window. Holly whispered, "Maybe there's someone." But the rest of her words dissolved as they reached the door. It stood open just enough to see inside. The room was bare except for a table in the center. On it lay a single object, a map drawn in faded ink on animal hide. Lines that might be rivers, circles that might be settlements. At the center, in the same dark ink, a crude symbol, a spiral surrounded by small marks. Caleb reached for it, but before his fingers touched the surface, every candle, every lantern, every ember in that room went out at once. The darkness was absolute. Somewhere in that black, something shifted. Not footsteps, but the sound of fabric dragging across wood. Mia's hand found Caleb's sleeve, and she pulled him back into the cold night air. The lantern in the window was lit again, but the cabin was empty. Dan's voice was shaking now, though he tried to keep it steady. "We need to get down. Any direction, just down." They moved fast, no longer caring about the trail crashing through underbrush, sliding down slopes. The trees all looked the same, the air thicker the farther they went. Then a break in the forest. They stumbled into another clearing smaller than the first. And there, impossibly, was the same circle of cabins. Not similar. The same. The rocking chair moved again. The crib rocked. The bread on the table was warm. It was then they understood. They hadn't left. Or maybe the village had followed. Dan was the first to speak, his voice low, almost like he was trying not to wake something sleeping just beyond the tree line. "It's a loop," he said. "We're walking in circles. Not because we're lost, but because something wants us to be." No one argued. The words didn't sound crazy anymore, they just felt like truth. Mia moved to the nearest cabin, forcing herself to cross the threshold. Her flashlight swept the inside, a bed, neatly made, a wooden chest at the foot. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, and something older like damp cloth. She crouched by the chest and lifted the lid. Inside were folded clothes, rough hand-stitched, and under them a child's wooden toy carved into the shape of a horse. The edges were worn smooth by small hands long gone. She felt a pinch in her chest. Whoever had lived here had done so minutes ago or decades ago. There was no way to tell. Caleb stood in the doorway, scanning the other buildings. "We should check them all. Look for food, water, anything we can use." They split up. Holly entered the cabin with the rocking crib. She pushed the door open wider, the hinges groaning softly. The cradle's motion slowed, but didn't stop, as if acknowledging her. Inside was a quilt, brightly colored, stitched with care. Holly ran her fingers across it, then froze. The fabric was warm. Across the clearing, Dan tried the cabin with the bread on the table. He broke a piece off, held it in his hand. Steam curled up in the cold air. He didn't eat it. When they regrouped at the center of the clearing, they had more questions than answers. Every cabin was the same, occupied, but empty. Lived in, but abandoned. Mia unfolded the map they'd found earlier. Under the beam of her flashlight, the spiral symbol seemed to shift as if the ink were still wet. "This isn't just a map," she murmured. "It's a marker." "For what?" Holly asked. "Where we are," Mia said. "Or what's holding us." Caleb's jaw tightened. "We're not the first ones here." They didn't speak for a long time after that. Dan finally suggested building a signal fire, something to mark their location, in case a ranger plane flew over. But when they tried, the matches flared and died. The lighter's flame snuffed out instantly, as though the air itself rejected it. By late afternoon, the cold was biting through their jackets. They decided to rest in one of the cabins, rather than try to navigate the dark. Dan chose the one with the map table. At least, it felt neutral. Inside, they lit their flashlights and arranged themselves on the floor backs against the wall. The silence was oppressive, not the natural stillness of the woods, but something deliberate, as though sound had been removed from the world. And then from outside came the crunch of footsteps on frost. Not one set, several. Slow measured, pacing the perimeter of the cabin. Dan's hand tightened around the handle of his knife. Holly's breathing quickened, too loud in the dead air. The footsteps stopped at the door. A long pause. Then a single knock. Not loud, not urgent. Just enough to say, "I know you're here." No one moved. After a few seconds, the footsteps began again, circling once, twice, and then fading into the distance. They didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the mist was thicker than before. The village looked blurred like a photograph left in the rain. Mia stepped outside and found fresh prints in the frost, not boot prints, but bare feet long-toed deep in the heel. Caleb pointed to the well in the center of the clearing. "We haven't looked in there yet." Dan tied a length of rope from his pack around a heavy rock and dropped it in. The sound of it hitting water came much too quickly, as if the well was only a few feet deep. But when Mia leaned over, the darkness inside seemed to go down forever. Something moved far below, sending out slow ripples. They backed away without speaking. It was then Holly noticed something else. The cabins had shifted. Not in location, in number. There were more than before. 6 yesterday, 8 today. And if the pattern held tomorrow, there would be 10. By midday, the mist had begun to thin in patches, revealing more of the cabins and more details that hadn't been there before. Or maybe they had been, and the group simply hadn't noticed in the fear and chaos of the night. On the side of one cabin, a series of shallow carvings ran along the wood almost at eye level. Caleb brushed frost away, revealing dates. The earliest read 1903, the latest 1987. No names, no explanations. Just years, each one carved with the same precise hand. Mia traced one with her fingertip. "That's impossible. This timber isn't even that old." Inside another cabin, Holly found a journal on the windowsill. The paper was yellowed but intact, the handwriting looping and deliberate. She began to read aloud. October 14th, the strangers came again. They spoke of leaving, but the path won't open. We told them it never does. The entry ended abruptly, the next page blank except for a single word in the center, "Stay." Dan was quiet, watching the tree line as she read. "So they were trapped too," he said finally. "But where are they now?" No one answered. They decided to search every cabin again, this time with care, opening drawers, looking under beds, prying up loose floorboards. In one, Caleb found a child's shoe caked in dried mud, too small for anyone in their group. In another, Mia discovered a locket containing a photograph of a woman in early 20th century dress. Her eyes seemed almost alive, the faintest suggestion of a smile curling her lips. But it was the third cabin that stopped them cold. The moment Dan opened the door, the smell of wet earth and smoke hit them. Against the far wall sat a trunk, its lid propped open. Inside was a pile of belongings, modern belongings. A blue hiking jacket, a dented stainless steel water bottle, a laminated trail map from the National Park Service. Holly stepped forward, pulling the jacket free. Her hands shook as she read the stitched name on the inside tag, Eric Holland. Caleb's head snapped up. That's the guy from the missing posters, the one who vanished here last spring. Mia's stomach dropped. She'd seen the flyer tacked up in the ranger station. The photo of a young man smiling, holding up a fish. The cheerful caption, "Last seen heading toward Klingman's Dome." But the strangest thing wasn't the jacket. It was the map inside the trunk, an exact copy of the one they had found on the table the night before, complete with a spiral mark. Only this one had something extra, 4 small dots drawn around the spiral, like the points of a compass. 4 dots. 4 of them. The realization settled on them all at once, and no one wanted to voice it. Outside, the air shifted, a sudden sharp wind, carrying with it a faint scent of bread baking. The same smell from the first cabin. Holly closed the trunk slowly. It's like this place collects people. The word hung there, heavy and final. Caleb stepped out into the clearing, looking around with new eyes. If others came before us, maybe some of them stayed. Maybe they didn't have a choice. Dan's jaw tightened, or maybe they stopped trying to leave. That night, the mist returned thicker than ever, curling through the cracks in the cabin walls. Mia couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the faint lantern glow in the cabin across the clearing. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a figure passing by the window. Tall, thin, wearing a jacket she recognized. It was Eric Holland. Mia jerked back from the window, heart hammering in her chest. "Dan," she whispered. He was already awake, crouched by the door with the knife in his hand, eyes locked on the glow outside. Holly stirred, then froze when she followed his gaze. Caleb moved to the window, but when he looked, the lantern light in the opposite cabin flickered and went out. The clearing was silent again. Then somewhere beyond the cabins came the unmistakable sound of children laughing. Not close, not loud, but carried on the wind like an echo from another time. Holly's voice cracked. "Tell me you all heard that." No one denied it. Dan motioned for them to stay low as he eased the door open, scanning the clearing. The mist swirled at knee height, glowing faintly in the moonlight. They crossed to the cabin where Mia had seen the figure. The door stood open, creaking gently. Inside, the air was warmer, and on the table sat a single steaming mug. The smell was sharp and herbal, almost medicinal. Caleb touched the mug. Still hot. In the far corner of the room, the shadows seemed deeper, darker. Dan's flashlight beam slid over them and caught on a shape. A man, standing perfectly still, facing the wall. Eric, Mia's voice was barely more than a breath. The figure didn't move. Dan took a step forward. "Hey, we're here to..." The man turned. It wasn't Eric. The face was wrong, too long, the skin pale and smooth like wax, the eyes black from edge to edge. And yet the mouth smiled exactly like the photograph from the missing poster. Holly screamed. The figure lunged not toward them, but toward the door, slipping past so close that the air seemed to fold around it. In seconds, it was gone into the fog. Dan slammed the door, bolting it with a rusted latch. "We're leaving, now." They grabbed their packs and ran, cutting through the clearing toward the trail they'd entered on. But within minutes, they hit the same tree with the crooked split, the one they'd passed hours before. They turned left, right, tried again. The same tree, the same clearing. The village was pulling them back. The mist thickened until they could barely see their own hands. Shapes moved in it, tall, thin, watching. The children's laughter returned louder now, weaving between the trees like a thread they couldn't cut. Caleb stumbled, catching himself on the well's stone lip. He looked down and froze. In the black water below, 4 figures stared up at him. Himself, Dan, Mia, Holly. Perfect reflections, but they weren't moving like the group was moving. They were smiling. The reflections reached up. Caleb fell backward, scrambling away. It's us. It's us down there. The ground beneath their feet felt suddenly wrong, softer, as if they were standing on something hollow. From beneath came a dull rhythmic sound, like footsteps on wood. The cabins around them shifted again, the doors all swinging open in unison. Warm light spilled out, beckoning. Inside each doorway stood a figure motionless, watching. Mia's voice cracked. They're waiting for us. Dan's hand clamped around Mia's wrist, pulling her back from the nearest doorway. Don't look at them, he hissed. Just keep moving. But there was nowhere to move to. Every direction bled back into the same clearing, the same ring of cabins, breathing warm light into the mist. It was as if the village had folded in on itself, sealing them inside. The figures in the doorways didn't step forward. They didn't speak. They simply stood a silent audience, as though waiting for the hikers to understand something or to surrender to it. Caleb's voice shook. Maybe if we talk to them. Holly spun on him, panic flaring in her eyes. You saw that thing. That wasn't human. The laughter came again, closer now, circling them. The mist swirled, and for an instant, Mia thought she saw movement in the space between the cabins, small shapes darting just out of sight. Children, or things that wanted to be seen as children. Then, without warning, every lantern in every cabin guttered out. Darkness swallowed them. The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. It was total. No wind, no creak of wood, no distant animals. Even their breathing sounded muffled, as though the air itself had thickened. Dan's flashlight sputtered, flickering over the well. This time the water wasn't black. It was clear, and it reflected only 3 faces. Mia's chest tightened. Where's Caleb? They turned. He was gone. No sound of running, no rustle of leaves. One moment he'd been there, the next nothing. Holly staggered back, hands over her mouth. No. From the darkness of the nearest cabin, a shadow moved. Something stepped into the doorway, wearing Caleb's jacket. It smiled at them, that same black-eyed, waxen grin. Dan grabbed Mia and Holly, hauling them toward the tree line. He didn't care which way they ran anymore, any direction that wasn't here. The mist clung to them, cold and damp, clawing at their clothes. They burst through a wall of undergrowth and stumbled onto a trail. Not the one they'd taken in, but a trail nonetheless. Dan didn't stop to question it. For minutes or hours, they couldn't tell. They ran until the trees thinned and the world opened into the gravel lot of the trailhead. The sky above was pale with morning light. They collapsed near the car, gasping, shaking, unable to speak. When they finally looked back, the trail was gone. Only unbroken forest stared back at them. And from somewhere deep within, it faint and almost tender, came the sound of a door closing. Two weeks later, a ranger found a backpack, deep in the Smokies, miles from any marked trail. Inside was a blue hiking jacket, a dented stainless steel water bottle, and a map marked with a spiral. There were 5 dots now.